Right, so Liam, can we kick in with apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Councillors Sylvester Hall, Councillor Afsar, Councillor Huckfield and Councillor Sweeney.
Thank you. Any declaration of interest?
Chair, do I need to declare that I've changed my role a bit, or is that not necessary?
No, it's not necessary, Keith. Thank you. Agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of March 2024. Can someone agree they're a correct record, please, so I can sign them?
Absolutely.
Thank
Myself,
you. Thank you, Liam, for
Richard.
presenting them. That brings us to agenda item 4. I think Rachel's going to just give us a brief update because Hassan's not arrived yet.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, apologies that Hassan is not here today. And to be honest, there's very little to update members on since the last meeting. So you are all aware that there was a consultation and the proposal to deal with the audit backlog on a national level. So we're still awaiting the outcome of that consultation. We responded to it, and I'm sure that the audit firms also submitted their own company responses. So we're just waiting for the outcome of that to be published, and then we will have some further information to bring to members. So just to be aware that the proposed backstop date for the unaudited accounts, so for us we're talking about 21-22 and 22-23 sets of accounts. The proposed backstop date for those audits to be completed is 30th of November, I think, 2024. So that's the proposal. We're just waiting for the outcome to be published before we know whether that date is set in stone or not. So up until that point, we can expect to see Hassan coming back to committee to report to members on progress with those unaudited accounts.
Agenda item 5, annual report of the work of the Audit and Standards Committee. That's Lisa Andrews. Over to you, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everybody. This particular report is the summary, is the annual report of this committee, and it reports through to full council, really looking at the overall work that we've undertaken throughout 23-24, particularly looking at assessing the adequacy, effectiveness of the Council's governance, risk management and internal control framework, looking at the work of the internal and external audit functions and also the financial reporting arrangements. So in terms of key highlights from the report, I'll just sort of highlight a number of key issues that have gone through. We look at the code of corporate governance that comes through. We have established the Audit and Standards Committee that was established in 2005. So that was when the requirement for councils to have an Audit and Standards Committee first came in. So we've now got almost 20 years worth of history in terms of working arrangements. So that's something I would say to mark. We continue to have a professional and arm's length arrangements with both our external auditors, and obviously during 23-24 it's been a transitional year, and linking back to the previous item will continue to be so for a little while moving forward. During 23-24 we met 6 times, and we produce our agendas as required. We published online. We have an open session and also a private session where we consider confidential items. In terms of the key work of internal audit, paragraph 8 of the report highlights that the internal audit plan was agreed at its July meeting, picked out the key risk areas for 23-24, and they're included within the paragraph. And you have continued to receive the final reports of all of those audit areas as they have become available and they've been finalised, be it regardless of audit opinion. In terms of the annual outturn report, Debbie, as Chief Internal Auditor, presented the overall audit opinion again at the July 23 review and gave an adequate assurance opinion and picked out a number of areas for notable improvement. The Internal Audit Charter has been reviewed, and it's been reviewed a couple of times. And as part of that, we looked at the reporting arrangements that govern which reports come through to yourselves as the Audit Committee. So they are mainly the top risk areas and those as a result of special investigations and also any limited assurance reports. So during 23-24, you considered the final reports for highways transformation, SEND strategy implementation, SEND personal budgets, the controls surrounding Nexus and company governance, sales to cash, building resilient families and community, and also children's disability services. As part of your work programme, you've asked for a number of areas to come back to you for further information in respect of implementing the recommendations contained in those reports. You had mainly three particular areas: the infrastructure and asset data management. You've at the last meeting of the committee in March, and you asked for a subsequent visit from the relevant officers in 2025, and that's gone into the forward plan. Had a look at settlement agreements again, and also another review of SEND transformation update, and Hallett came to discuss that at the last meeting. Also, I think it's important to note, because it sort of crossed over on the beginning of the audit year, that we had the internal audit 5-year external quality assessment, and that came out as achieving the highest standards that was undertaken by SIPA. So that gives you confidence that your internal audit function is operating to the highest standards in accordance with the public sector internal audit standards. In relation to counter-fraud work, as part of the annual plan in process, you receive details of the counter-fraud work that internal audit will undertake and has undertaken, and that's summarised as part of the annual outturn, the results of that. During 23-24, the major sort of piece of investigative work related to SEND personal budgets. That matter has gone to the police, and we understand earlier this week, the end of last week, there's that item. The individuals have now been charged through the CPS process. Okay. In relation to our governance and risk management reviews, we've had a look at the Code of Corporate Governance. That will be updated again, and you'll have that updated version that will come to the next meeting in July. We, as the Audit and Standards Committee, approved several changes to the Council's constitution and schemes of delegation, namely in respect of countryside and rights of way delegations, member officers, relationships, and update of the existing guidance, the adoption of statutory guidance on settlement agreements and constitutional changes, and then also the proposed constitutional changes in respect of Nexus as the operational LAPCO company for the council. The draft annual governance statement was presented in December, but subsequent to that, for 22-23, but following the receipt of the Ofsted report in respect of children's services, which was given the opinion requires improvements, that a further revision of that document was brought to the the February meeting, and the Chief Executive came and explained the information and actions that was going to be taken in respect of those. With regard to the draft statement of accounts for 22-23, they've been published on the website in accordance with timescales required by the accounts and audit regulations. They've been deferred coming through for scrutiny to this particular committee because we have got the substantial backlog of information previously. Steps will be taken to bring those to you at the earliest possible date. The annual code of conduct for members regarding management of complaints was presented to you there was 15 complaints, 14 received had been concluded with no breaches of conduct, and the remaining one was awaiting consideration. In terms of additional duties that the committee has conducted, you have approved at your April 23 meeting the appointment of several councillors to serve as a panel to appoint the 2-member vacancies on the Independent Remuneration panel, together with the appointment to full council of the following members outlined at paragraph 6 to serve as a standards panel for 23-24 as well. So you've updated duties in respect of those. You continue to receive the annual report on information governance and also on health and safety, and discussed the contents of those with the relevant officers and received assurances in respect of those. You also received at the September meeting the first Civil Contingencies Governance Annual Report for the first time, so that came through to you to receive assurances in respect of that role that's operated by the council. During May 23, we undertook a series of exercises at a workshop to evaluate the effectiveness of the Audit and Standards Committee. We've had a number of reports that have come through to you regarding how effective the organisation works and operates as a committee, together with a number of actions, namely updating the terms of reference and exploring the opportunity to appoint an independent officer to assist the Audit and Standards Committee in the discharge of their duties. In respect of external audit, you have continued to receive regular updates regarding the current position in respect of the outstanding accounts, and that is detailed in those particular paragraphs under external audit from paragraphs 33 through to 42. You've also received a briefing from our new external audit colleagues from KPMG, who will take over responsibility for the 23-24 annual accounts. So the report before you is a detailed summary of all of the work that we've undertaken during the past 12 months. The purpose of this report is to report the content of this through to full council. So the recommendation is that you approve this document ready for the chair to present to the next committee, which is scheduled for, the next council meeting, which is scheduled for the 16th of May. Happy to take any questions.
Graham?
Thank you very much, Lisa. Until I read this report, I didn't realise how much we'd actually done. I was quite surprised, and I thought, well, we've got through some stuff, and it's been very interesting. I think this is a committee that people don't particularly like coming before, because they do get grilled somewhat. So thank you very much for the report. I totally agree with everything that's been said in it, but just like to offer congratulations to all my fellow members and the chairman and deputy chair for what we've got through, because it's been good, and it's been a good year for us. The only thing that's let us down is the external auditors, really, but I won't go into that.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. I'll sort of echo those. I think the team we've got here, the fact that they had the external report and we've come out at the high standard is really a credit to the team here, and so a big thank you to Lisa and the team. And do you want to say something, Caroline?
I did, if that's all right with you, Mr. Chairman. On the same lines, actually, I've picked up on exactly the same as Graham, that internal audit here is second to none. And so I do have a question, if that's all right. Rachel, I'm going to put you a bit on the spot. Because this is our last committee under Rob Salmon as our 151 officer, I'm really quite concerned of who's going to come in as the 151 officer, because the team here work so well together, and I think we all agree that there's going to be huge changes next year with the committee anyway, that the internal audit really needs to stay as they are, you know, a proper little family, so to speak. So do you know who the 151 officer is going to be? Because I'm very worried about it being from outside.
Yes, so I can inform members that the Director of Finance will be Pete Shakespeare. So he will take over when Rob officially leaves, which is at the beginning of June. He's an internal person. He has been before this committee in relation to an item on Nexus a few months ago he attended. So you might remember that you've seen him previously. So yeah, he's internal, which means handovers can start, and they are underway with Rob. So yeah, that there won't be any gap or anything. So it'll just be quite a smooth transition, hopefully.
Will you be replacing him?
Yes, so recruitment is underway currently to replace Pete in his old role.
Are you going for that?
I'm already on the... No, because I'm already on that level, so I don't need to apply for that. But I don't want any more work. I'd just do one person's job, if that's okay.
Rachel, that's excellent news. Thank you for that. Just for a quick update as well on back to Lisa. 32, I've just gone off it now. 32 talks about the recruiting the internal auditor, which we have spoke about before. I've noticed, I had an email from someone, I can't remember who, saying about how much we'd be paying an external auditor, and could you just give me a little... Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the recruitment documentation has been pulled together in order to facilitate that that recruitment process. And it's subtle things like, do they need to fill out an application form? Do they need to send in CVs? So it's just understanding how to pitch that and how to produce that. In terms of the fee, it will be in line with our current arrangements that we have for the independent members on standards panels, the two areas that I spoke about in the report, so it'll be on a par with that. The individual, the councillor that you referred to, I've actually been copied into that email as well, and he's raised some points. I've found it quite useful because he's talking about how many people would we have on an appointments panel. They're proposing 3 members of the Audit and Standards Committee, together with the monitoring officer, and also, I think it means the Section 151 officer, not the Section 106 officer. So, yeah. so I think that's where he's coming from. I would echo that as a potential composition of a panel, but perhaps you may wish to reflect on the number of councillors who would wish to be involved in that. You may want to have more, possibly 5, to be in line with the appointments to standards panel. So that's where we are at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you.
Just say, yeah, great report, and thank you very much for bringing it to here today. Yeah, I didn't realise how much we'd done either, to be honest, over the last year or so. In terms of, is this report, as it is going to go to council, presented to full council in its current form? Because the only reason I ask is that other things tend to have dashboard things like there's some sort of representation as to what you're trying to achieve, you know, pie charts, all this sort of stuff. So I don't know whether we're going to do this on an annual basis, or is this going to be something that is just a one-off? Because if it is just a one-off, that's fine. If it's going to be something we go on to and other committees in the future will look and compare and contrast. I just think we need to have just a little bit more structure around how it's presented, that was all. And I think that was it, really. I noticed that children's services were only partially mentioned in some of this. Is that something that we're going to be going on to do more internal audit on, as from the presentation last year, because it's not included in this report to such the same depth as I thought we were going to be going on to. So they're the two questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'll take the structure question first. In respect of, this is an annual report, so yes, it will go. It follows the same format as last time. Probably just needs some tweaks in terms of making it into the format that reports get submitted to full council in. And obviously it's written on behalf of, it's the report of the chairman of the committee. In respect of presentation wise, yes, I take on board the point in relation to we could make it a little bit more user friendly, a bit more readable. I will certainly take that away for next year, if I may, rather, because the dead, yeah, yeah, in terms of that, and I'll give some thought as to how we can present that information, but a lot of it is quite, I suppose, wordy. In respect of the children's side, this is about the work of the committee, so it's considering how and what you've looked at. In terms of the audits, yes, Debbie will outline for you later on the agenda, probably next item, all of the suite of work that we'll be doing in relation to the children's aspect. There was more information in the annual governance statement that talked about the issues relating to the weaknesses that were present within the children. So it would sit within that document as opposed to being the detail in this one. Okay, thank you.
Right, we'll move on to agenda item 6, which is the external audit plan. We've got Richard here from KPMG. So, Richard, over to you. Thank you for coming.
Thanks very much, Chair. Okay, so before I start, I'll just introduce Rob to you. So, Rob Fenton's Senior Manager on the audit, and he's responsible for the vast majority of our delivery to date. So, I wouldn't want to take any of the credit for that. But Rob will take this report as a double act, if that's okay, and I'll just introduce very high level, and then Rob will take you through two of the more detailed points. But yeah, the document in the report is our audit plan for 23-24 audit. So I think at the last committee, I sort of set out an indicative level the work that we'd been doing around getting to grips with the authorities' activities and developing those relationships and starting to understand your systems, processes and how things work on a day-to-day basis. So we're now in a position where that work is done. We've cleared the planning and risk assessment milestone, and then we can present this plan to you as a formal document. It remains draft because it's effectively a live document, so we're constantly doing that kind of risk assessment piece. If new information comes to light, then naturally we need to respond to that whilst it has an impact on our financial statements, but also our VFM conclusions, our value for money conclusions. In terms of the financial statements work is well progressed, and that's why you've got this document. Our value for money risk assessment is progressing really well. We're not quite in a position to be able to present that to you, but I'm comfortable with where we're up to in terms of progress on that. And you know, it's likely, I suspect, the next committee will bring the VFM risk assessment work to you. But regardless, that will feed into our conclusions at the end of the process in line with the timetable that I discussed previously. And then we've got the pension fund work that's going on in the background as well. And that report's currently going through a quality review with the central KPMG team. So all our pension funds audits are up to a consistent position across the country, and that's really because of we're just dealing with the fact that some of the predecessor audits are obviously ongoing, so we're just navigating our way through how that looks from a presentation perspective. But just to summarise, the report basically is setting out our risk assessment, of the risk over the financial statements. It covers quite a few mandatory communications that we're required to present by audit standards and legislation, and it confirms our independence and the fees that have been set by PSAA for the authority. So I'll just pause there and then hand Rob over to cover off materiality and some of the risks, if that's okay.
Live. Thanks, Richard. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. I mean, I'll just take you through some of the sort of salient points from the report. So start with materiality, page 27 for the 27 of the pack. Materiality is the basis, the sort of threshold at which we design our audit procedures. You can appreciate that we don't audit every pound in the authority's books. So our threshold of materiality is 25 million, and that's based on a benchmark, which is the gross expenditure of the prior year unaudited accounts, which is 1.82% of that value. And if anyone's got any questions on materiality, I'm happy to pick that up at the end. If I just touch then on page 29 to 32 of the pack, which is our significant risks. So these are where is our sort of greatest focus of time around sort of testing. Significant risks, or where we deem there to be the sort of the highest likelihood of misstatement. These are all risks of error, and they are driven mainly by whether significant judgment or estimate in those particular balances. So the valuation of land and buildings, a highly material amount in the financial statements. The authority has an external value, the DVS, who value that, and a lot of our work is around understanding what assumptions they've used, and us then benchmarking those assumptions to what what else we see in the sector, and also comparing them to other authorities as well. The management override of controls is an ISA mandated risk. You'll have seen that in previous audit plans presented by external auditors, and that's where there's a risk where management is in a sort of unique position to perpetrate fraud due to their abilities to, for example, post manual journals and use sort of determine accounting estimates, selection of accounting policies, which may sort of impact and influence how the accounts are put together. Finally, we've got a risk around the valuation of post-retirement benefit obligations, the pension liability. Again, there's a significant amount of estimation and judgment there using assumptions that actuarial expertise need to pull together. And again, we use our own pension specialists to sort of benchmark against those assumptions and determine if they're reasonable and within a particular sort of threshold that we deem to be reasonable. Page 33 and 34, we talk about our rebuttal of the significant risk around fraudulent expenditure recognition and fraudulent revenue recognition. We've deemed that we can rebut the risk against both of those, and in those instances we've got to determine about the sort of fraud incentives and opportunities, and we deem them to be sort of lower risk at this entity, and therefore rebutted that risk. It's worth noting that is an iterative sort of position, and we will look to revisit it right up until the final audit, and if there are any changes we'll communicate that to the committee. The rest of the report just contains our sort of mandatory communications around sort of independence, fees, and reporting timetables. But yeah, happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Chair. I was very happy with everything that KPMG has presented. However, I did note the significant increase in audit fees that we're going to have to pay. And given that the previous auditors were woefully late on virtually everything that they did, we'd like from you, Richard, reassurance that we'll actually get things on time, because for the amount of money we're paying. And that's the one thing that I really, really want to see, is our external audit on time, so that we can actually manage things much better. As you can imagine, what we felt like over the last 3 years in dealing with stuff that was so woefully late. Over to you.
Thanks. So just to respond on that, as I said, I think in terms of the fee levels, they're set by the PSAA. So in terms of our input into that, obviously, what you get charged is set by PSAA. And I think in terms of, I think consistently I've said it's in our interest as well to make sure that we deliver these audits on time. I think we're all very much committed to that, and I'd like to think that so far we've kind of started as we mean to go on. We've got an audit plan when we said we would deliver an audit plan, and our work is progressing in line with the timeline that we said we would deliver to. So I'd like to think that we'd be judged based on, you know, how we're performing currently rather than necessarily the situation in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to speak in KPMG's favour for, I think, the first time in about 4 years. Their fund was too low. The amount that the government set for them was too low. So I'm actually glad that it's gone up, and it gives you a chance at doing your job right. So I'll not say the same as Graham on this one. Your number one risk of being value of land and buildings, are you saying that you think that they need evaluation every year? Because we value them every 5 anyway, and you'd never do that with, you know, your own business or your own land sort of thing. So could you just explain why that's your top risk, please?
Apologies. Need to get used to that. I suppose what I would say is that of the 3 risks, they're probably on equal footing. I think it's just an order of things, just to give that sort of context. I wouldn't say that that you would need to value all property, all land and buildings on an annual basis. It will be impractical for one, and not, you know, very difficult to do. So effectively, the authority follow the CIFA code, and that's what we expect, and that's how we would approach it. So the sort of quinquennial revaluation approach that's taken is perfectly reasonable, and not something that we would be challenging or suggesting is significantly risky. You know, even if the land and buildings was valued on an annual basis, we would still have it as a significant risk because of the level, because of the size, because of the judgment involved. So, yeah.
Thank you for that explanation. That makes more sense. I was just thinking it meant that you were doing a lot of work on, yeah, land's always a huge risk. And I forgot to say welcome to our meeting, Robert. I love your plan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to say that quite like some of the flow charts and various other bits and pieces you've got on there. It shows quite clearly your commitment to improvement and all the rest of it on an ongoing basis. It's pleasantly presented in something that might make sense to other people that aren't on this committee, so that's really good on that front. Just one question I have at the moment. Obviously, you still say it's draft. I was going to ask a question exactly that Carolyn had, so I'm just going to change the second question only. What might change, do you think, between now and when you want it to be final draft form or whatever, the form that's going to be presented to the council itself outside this committee? What other things you're sort of still waiting for to settle down in this area?
Through the Chair, to be honest, the only thing that I would expect to probably come into this document would be that value for money risk assessment that would effectively sit within this document and finalise it. So that would be the only thing. I don't expect the risks to change, but naturally we remain alert for any changes. So
back up on that in terms of risks. Do you assess the risks on an ongoing basis, or would you adjust if other risks then appeared, particularly with how volatile the whole world is at the moment? What other risks might you perceive? Would there be a bit of work to be done in terms of preempting what might be? At the moment, obviously, it's buildings and other things, and the 3 that you've identified there. But what do you do to try and reduce the risk to us by doing pre-analysis of what other risks might be coming along?
yeah, that's a good question. So I mean, the sort of the structure of how we do our risk assessment, it's basically through a lot of inquiry, through a lot of review of your documentation that's available, performance reports. So clearly we've passed the year end, but if there was, we'll be naturally meeting with Rob and Pete over the coming weeks. I'm busy checking my names. But, you know, so if something were to come out of that conversation, or if there was something that we had seen that impacted another organisation, then clearly we have to make sure we consider that. So, you know, the increase in section 12, whatever the bankruptcy notices are that have been issued has informed our assessment. We're focusing on things like the impact that, for example, children's services and the pressures around that particular service or performance, that would impact our VFM considerations. And obviously your response, even though it is potentially post-year end, will naturally, we will need to consider whether there was arrangements in place during the financial year. So it's very iterative. So we've kind of drawn a line on the financial statements based on where the work that we've done to date, but you have to leave it open because new information may come to light. But if I don't anticipate that these headline risks would change. You don't? Not at the moment, no.
Agenda item 7, which is the internal audit plan. So it's over to you, Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. So this report presents the internal audit plan and strategy paper for 24-25 for final endorsement before it is then formally approved by the Director of Finance and Section 151 officer. So on page 53 of your pack, that's the start of the covering report, and this gives you some further background as to why the report's being presented here today. So the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015 require that authorities have an effective internal audit, taking into account public sector internal audit standards. One way that, as an internal audit function, that we demonstrate this is by having a robust, risk-based internal audit plan that focuses internal audit resources on the key priorities of the Council. So as I take you through the detail of the plan, hopefully you will appreciate the level of detail that the team have gone through in producing the plan for you today. The whole of the plan in its glory can be found on pages 59 to 115 of your pack, and that plan is supported by a PowerPoint presentation which starts on page 117 to 135. So if I can draw your attention to the presentation, if you don't mind, I'll focus on that because that covers all the detail that's in the covering report and is a bit easier on the eye, really. So the aims of today's presentation really is to demonstrate to the committee that there is a robust methodology in formulating the audit plan, and hopefully it will give you some comfort that we are focusing on the key risks faced by the authority at the moment. Also, throughout the presentation, I can hopefully draw your attention to the fact that whilst we have some planned work, it's not set in stone, and we do flex the plan to take account of any emerging risks, and we do have contingency time in the plan to account for any risks that occur during the course of the year. Also, finally, to give you assurance that we do have sufficient resources to deliver on our plan for 24-25. So the internal audit strategy document itself, well, it is a key governance document for the internal audit function, and it really does set out what your internal audit service does for most of the year. and it's here today obviously for final endorsement before Rob Salmon, as the Director of Finance, approves the plan. So the first part of the strategy sets out the risk assessment process and also the key principles that we like to adhere to when we are constructing the plan. The risk assessment process, it's really detailed, so we actually start our process in January, beginning of the year, and it really goes on until March, April time. We see 60, 70 people, so the audit managers across the council get to see a multitude of people. We talk to all of SLT, the wider leadership team and members of the operational management team as well, to get a wealth of information that really does help us prepare the plan, and it's very detailed, as you can see from within the plan itself. So we talk to a multitude of people and we get all this information, and then we put it through our risk assessment process, and we risk score, taking into account materiality, so that's sort of the value and volume of transactions going through a system. We look at the sensitivity and impact of a system, our experience in terms of when we last audited it and the opinion that we gave it, as well as links to risk management and any other sources of assurance, because again, we want to use our resources wisely and we don't want to duplicate where somebody else may be giving us an assurance. And we also look at fraud factors and stability of the system as well, in terms of whether it's more automated or where it's quite manually driven. All that gets put into our computer system, and it churns out a risk assessment score, and that really helps us to focus our internal audit resources on those key risks. In terms of the key principles that we apply, well, we like to cover high risk areas unless there are alternative sources of assurance or a reason why we can't look at something during the year. We also like to have financial audits included within the plan, as well as some contingency time and also compliance audits, because we don't like to just focus at the corporate centre. We like to go out as well and do establishment visits, be it adult social care, registrars, so we get to try and cover a whole multitude of functions across the council. In terms of some of the detail and some of the numbers then, in terms of what we're hoping to deliver for 24-25, you'll see that the plan comes to 2,200 days, and that's split between systems work, which is 1,725, with 475 additional days dedicated to proactive and reactive fraud work. On top of that, we also have external clients as well, such as Staffordshire Council and more recently Newcastle and Lyme Borough Council's internal audit function. We're now delivering that service for them, and I was there last night with Richard and Rob. And we also undertake comfort funds audits, and also, as you know, we undertake pension fund audits as well. So we do a whole multitude of work throughout the course of the year. So focusing on some of the detail then, these are what we have identified as some of the key risk areas and key council priorities for the year ahead. Hopefully these will resonate with you, and what, as Lisa has mentioned, in terms of reporting to you, you will get to see the top risk reviews, the full report. They will be presented to you as part of our reporting protocol. So we've got the new care system. So the replacement for care director, we will be doing a piece of work in relation to that during the course of the year, and again, you'll get to see that full report. We'll continue to provide assurance on the Highways Transformation Programme, and you will get to see the results of that work during the course of the year. SEND, again, that's one of the regular top risk reviews that we have, and again, you'll get to see various pieces of work and assurance brought to this committee. And cyber assurance, as you can imagine, following the cyber attack last year, we're continuing to keep a suite of cyber assurance work in the plan. Digital strategy and transformation, we have a new area of artificial intelligence that we're going to be doing some work on during the course of the year, looking at how that is being used within the council and what those risks are associated with that and how we're mitigating against any risks. We will have a suite of governance work as well, and I'll come on to that in a bit later, but one of the areas that we are going to look at is culture, values and behaviours. And then at number 8, we have corporate improvements. So following the appointment of the Chief Executive, we have a corporate improvement programme, and we'll be doing some work in relation to some of the key projects associated with the corporate improvement programme, as well as looking at the governance of the improvement board as well. As mentioned by Councillor Flunder earlier, Children's Services Improvement will be doing a whole suite of work in relation to that, not just looking at the action plans associated following the Ofsted, but actually delving a bit deeper into some of those areas that were brought to our attention by Ofsted in terms of things like management of case files. So we'll be delving a bit deeper into some of those processes, hopefully to give some added value to the service in terms of where they can make some changes or improve on what they're doing. And then we've got procurement within the top 10 risk areas this year, and that is really because of the new Procurement Act that comes into force, and we'll be looking for compliance with the new Procurement Act as we go throughout the year. So I've mentioned the corporate improvement programme for 24-25, and as well as a number of those top risk areas that support the corporate improvement programme, there are a number of other audits within the plan that also support the corporate improvement programme, and I've just highlighted a few for you here. So there's the economic growth skills, A50 corridor, Staffordshire careers, and town centre work. We'll be doing some work on that throughout the year. We are Staffordshire. Climate change, as you can imagine, is still very, very much important and a priority area. We've got waste management, countryside estates, adult social care, getting ready for their Ofsted and giving some support in relation to that prior to Ofsted coming in. And also some work in relation to the community strategy. That strategy is currently being revised with a new delivery plan, and we'll be looking to give some assurance over the delivery of that strategy and plan. So there's an awful lot of good work there that's hopefully touching on some of those interesting areas that you may like to see. As well as those interesting areas, though, we do have to focus our attention on some financial audits as well. So we do have a cyclical process for undertaking financial audits. We don't look at all financial systems every year. There are a couple of systems that we do look at, though, annually. One of those is the payroll system. As you can imagine, it's incredibly big. A volume of transactions go through that annually, as well as budgetary control to make sure and give you assurance over the financial management of the council. We continue to keep on our radar sales to cash. As you know, that has come back to this committee previously with a limited assurance opinion. So again, for 23-24, we allowed them a bit of breathing space to embed a lot of the recommendations, and now we're going to re-pick that up and look at that again in 24-25 just to see whether all the required improvements have been made. And then we've got main accounting, which incorporates the bank reconciliation process. Coupled with all of that, we have a new back system that's coming in, so we'll give some support to that area, as well as looking at the corporate delivery plan and savings associated with that. So again, there's some good areas within the financial systems that we'll be looking at in 24-25. So earlier I've mentioned the governance audits. So one of the areas that we're going to be looking at is a new process, which is the corporate governance health check. Kate Loader and her team have a new process in place, looking at key lines of inquiry and the controls that support those key lines of inquiry. We're actually going to give some support to ensure that what's being presented to them accurately reflects the control environment, and also to look at that whole process itself to ensure that the controls have been evaluated properly to come out with the right result, because that does feed into Lisa's world in terms of the annual governance statement. We have a piece of work on culture, values and behaviour, and that's really looking at the extent to which the council works within a culture that promotes good values and good ethical standards. So I'll be looking at the whole suite of frameworks that we work within in terms of the financial regs, members' codes of conduct, schemes of delegation, and giving that overall feel for how we operate as a council. So that will be quite a big piece of work that will no doubt the approach will come back to this committee at some point. We'll also be looking at the corporate decision-making arrangements. We've previously looked at this during COVID, and that work has been put forward as part of the COVID inquiry work that continues to go on today. Because there's a number of boards that have been set up, we are hopeful that we're going to look at those arrangements to make sure that the decision-making is being carried out in accordance with what we would expect. And we're also going to instigate an assurance mapping exercise, looking at just some of the corporate systems at the moment, such as budgetary control, financial management, across the 3 lines of defence, to see whether that would be a worthwhile exercise to actually roll that out further across directorates in future years. And then, as you will know, and from Lisa's work from the annual report of the committee, we've previously had reported to us the Nexus Care Financial Assurance Review, and we're going to keep that on our books to re-look at again in its entirety during 24-25. As well as our own governance arrangements, we will continue to look at some of the key partnerships, and we do have to undertake work in relation to things like Midland Engine, the LEP transition arrangements as that closes down, and the new alternative arrangements that are in place. And we'll look at other sort of key contracts and other partnership arrangements such as the Section 75 agreements with the NHS. Moving on to schools compliance audits, well again, as you'll know from receiving the outturn over recent years, we have had an increase in the number of limited assurance reports in relation to schools. And again, that has largely been down to how we've selected our schools to review. We changed our fraud risk assessment process on schools a little while back, which meant we went to some of the smaller schools which didn't quite have some of the more robust systems in place, which has sort of weeded out some poorer controls in schools. So that has unfortunately led to an increase in the number of limiteds. We are going to increase the number of school visits for 24-25. We're actually going to look at 25 schools throughout the year rather than the 20, which is what we tend to do. And we're going to continue to supplement our schools compliance programme with our schools continuous controls monitoring, where we look at things such as purchase cards, creditor payments, and other areas as we see fit, to try and hopefully identify possible areas that are susceptible to fraud, which we can then investigate. So we're hopefully going to use our resources wisely and target key susceptible areas. We're also going to spend some more time giving greater communications to try and ensure that schools get things right before we actually attend, because nobody likes to give limited assurance reports. We're going to roll out a self-assessment governance checklist, so hopefully they can start to tick some of the boxes before we turn up. And we'll continue to support the bursars forums that happen throughout the year as well, to highlight some of those poorer practices and what they can do about it. So we're going to try and work with schools like we always do anyway, but try and do a bit more maybe hand-holding in places to try and raise that awareness of what's good controls and what they need to put in place. Moving on to the latter part of our audit plan then, so we have our counter-fraud element. We have 475 days associated with our fraud work, and that's a mix of both proactive and reactive work. We'll look at some of our policies around fraud, and that comes under the strategic development heading. We've got creating an anti-fraud culture, so again that's raising awareness, offering training where it's required, rolling out our e-learning fraud package as well. And then we've got our prevent and deter heading, and this is where we use our CCM, and that's using our data analytics and the data that we have to try and identify possible areas where we want to look at further and to highlight possible fraud. In terms of the 115 days of detection work, well, that's our proactive type of work, and I'll move on to that a little bit later in terms of what some of that work entails. And then we have a bucket of 170 days for investigation time as well, so we can draw upon that as and when we get fraud referrals come through to us. So moving on to our proactive counter-fraud work that we have planned for 24-25, this largely is influenced from our past experience of fraud. So again, as you will remember, we've previously had an issue in relation to purchasing cards, so we want to go out and visit some of the area service offices to give some assurance over the operations of purchasing cards and cash withdrawals at some of these establishments. We're going to continue to look at taxi operators to ensure compliance with the contractual arrangements, in particular relating to the employment of taxi drivers and personal assistants. We're going to look at send personal budgets and do some work in relation to prepaid cards and the verification of payments there following that fraud that happened last year. We're going to do some further work in relation to household waste recycling centres, again, because they're changing some of their processes and charging for, I think they've got a permit scheme for traders, so we want to look at how that is all being accounted for. We're going to do some work on the Divisional Highways programme as well in terms of how that fund, members spend that fund, and also we continue to keep on our books apprenticeship bank account transactions, and that's just verifying some of the transactions that go through our clients' accounts. So just to summarise them very quickly, hopefully you will see when you go through the detail of the audit plan that we have emphasis on strong financial management and the controls there, and we'll give you assurance of those. We'll have continued focus on some digital projects, including artificial intelligence, our huge corporate file plan project, and other digital enhancements that happen within directorates as well. We'll continue to provide assurance over children's services and the improvements that hopefully will come on board during 24-25. We've got a good helping of governance type work as well to give you that assurance over how we make our decisions and the transparency of decision makings during the course of the year. We'll give you assurance over procurement in terms of compliance with the new Procurement Act, and we'll do various other contract monitoring type audits you'll see within the detail. We'll look at some key partnerships, and then finally we've got a good programme of ICT audit work as well that will take place during the course of the year, and we have a very good relationship both with IGU and the ICT service with our ICT audit manager, who liaises very regularly with the head of service there. So hopefully you will have gained some assurance today that we do have a very thorough, robust process for producing the plan each year. Hopefully a number of those areas that we're going to be covering will be of interest to you and resonate in terms of the key risks faced by the authority at the moment. And hopefully I'll have demonstrated that we do have the resources in place to deliver the plan, and we've got that good balance of planned, structured work, as well as being able to respond to emerging risks as we go throughout 24-25. So I'm happy to take any questions in relation to any of that detail.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you very much. Extremely detailed plan, particularly with all the assessment beforehand and on the X number of pages for each of the areas and everything else, and number of, is it hours that has been spent or days being spent on it? I think it's days. Days, yes. So yeah, I'm glad to see that the year now has 1,000 days in it. So I'm only being facetious on that. I assume there's many people within it. Anyway, my only concern really is down to when it does ICT, AI and all the rest of it. You keep mentioning it throughout in terms of improvement of analysing what you're doing and everything else. But it only seems to have 3% of the days allocated to that area from the previous assessment. So my concern is that I think probably to be able to achieve everything that you want to achieve, you're probably going to need to do more on the ICT and more time being put into that, I would have thought. But that's the first question. Okay, I'll answer that one first.
So just to answer that then, so over recent years we used to have a bigger ICT programme, but what we've now done, we have pure ICT, which is where the 3% comes from, and then the other ICT work, so the directorate systems work is not buried within, but it's within the directorate sections. So we have around about 170, 180 days from memory of ICT work. Some of it is pure ICT, that's within the ICT section itself, the small number, and the others is within, if you start to read the detail, that's within that. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Chair. Yes, as I say, as long as ICT is written into the other 200 plus days in the other areas, that's fine. The pie chart, by the way, should be bigger. It's very good. It's difficult to, push it. It's a good bit of representation. It tells you what you're going to do in one chart rather than 50 pages of detail, if you see what I mean. So, for looking at it externally and for other people to understand, that's a good bit, tick on that one, big time. Glad to see you doing something about the schools as well. I think the schools at the moment are being restructured quite significantly across the whole county, across the whole country all the time. And the audit element of it is something that's being cut back, definitely at school level itself, up to academy. So it's going from the function of schools individually to groups of schools. And I do think you need to keep a careful eye on that, because I think that's something that need to make sure on, because I noticed you did the whole page on how you're going to try and improve the audit on those. Sorry, I'll come back. Okay, come back.
I suppose just to be clear, at the moment we don't audit academies. At the moment it is just the maintained schools. But yeah, should we re-look at auditing academies, then we do look at the multi-academy trust and produce a number of reports in the past. But at the moment we just want to focus on the maintained audits.
It's the conflict about doing the district and county work. Is there any conflict, or is there something that you do to stop there being any conflict between the two? That was it. Thank you, Chair.
I don't feel there is any conflict, actually. In actual fact, there's great synergy. So things like DFGs, we get to do the verification work and we get to control what is happening out at the district, and it allows us to get that greater assurance that feeds in through to the county work. So a lot of it is a lot of synergy, actually. Things like the Shared Prosperity Fund, we do it both at the district, and then we get to see it trundle all the way through to the county. So in actual fact, I think it adds value. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Debbie. Really good. As Keith said, very detailed. And what I think it shows is the improvements you're making on management of the county council overall. You're pulling things up that those teams should have done themselves, and you're embedding that. And I think that's what we're actually looking for, is the embedding of good practice. So thank you for that. You're doing a great job. 3 other things. On procurement, I don't know whether it's you or Rachel, but between you can bully the procurement team into producing something on the new Procurement Act and the differences that we should be looking for. Just a few bullet points. And if they could do that, and through the chair, that can come then to our committee. Because I think we all, rather than have to read the Procurement Act as ourselves, why not get one of our experts, like the head of procurement, to read it and come out with a few bullet points that we should be aware of. So if it's got "Buy British First," we'd like to be aware of that. So that's the second point. Third point, you mentioned you attending Bursar's forum. If you ever want a county councillor to attend with you, I'm more than happy to do so. I've long been a governor of schools and a trustee, so I'm not at the well, I'm a trustee of an academy, or a governor of a sixth form academy at the moment. But I'm always happy to come along if that was any benefit, but it's entirely up to you. And the last thing, Keith sort of touched on it, but a little bit more about how you're going to use AI to detect fraud, because I think that is going to be a magic tool for internal audit. So if you can just expand a little on that, because clearly Keith's interested in it as well, I'm interested in it.
Okay, so in relation to AI then, so we have got 10 days set aside to innovate audit. So that is to look at artificial intelligence and how we can use that. I have to say that's not my area of specialism at the moment. We have an ICT audit manager that's looking into that at the moment. And at some point, we'd love to share with you what we're going to do. But it's probably a bit too early for me to probably talk about that at this moment. But I think Lisa can say a bit more about some of the project work that she's dealing with.
Yeah. Thank you, Debbie. And I think we are at the very start of a project that the council are looking into widely in relation to the use of Copilot, Microsoft Copilot from AI. And I've only just recently received confirmation that I've got X number, I think I've got about 16 licenses that I can use to explore potential AI, and we can very easily make one available for Alex and Debbie to explore within the internal audit function to see how we could potentially use that rolling forward. But that is a project, and that's at the very initial stage moving forward. Yeah.
In relation to procurement, so I am working with the head of procurement at the moment to see how the new Procurement Act impacts on the procurement regulations. So with permission, perhaps we can bring something to this committee at a future date. Again, it won't be probably the next committee because that's a bit packed, but at some point we can bring that back to committee for you.
Mine's a really simple question, really. I quite like the reports, and I like that we're going into schools, and it keeps discussed at length, so I don't need. But mine's a really simple question. We seem to be looking at fairly low levels as well, such as the recycling centres. Unless I'm wrong, that feels quite low level. I don't know how much a recycling centre sort of takes in, but it feels quite low level. So is that a plan to look at that? Because it's easy to look at the big stuff. Is it a plan to look at those sort of lower levels?
We're not particularly looking at low levels, but household waste recycling centres, since they've transferred back in, they are susceptible to fraud in a number of ways in terms of bribery or allowing traders to come in and bunging them £20 and stuff like that. So we do want to keep that type of thing on our books. So again, it's all about it's reputational damage, and it's about raising awareness. So the counter fraud manager has already done some training out at recycling centres, and I think it's probably starting from the bottom up, isn't it? But it's not our strategy to look at low level stuff necessarily, but we do like to add value and give support where we can to new services, that particularly when they've been transferred back in-house. So that's why we're looking at household waste recycling centres, but it's not a general strategy to look at lower level stuff, really.
Yeah, I'll come back to you. That's great, and you've answered the question, really. I wondered whether we was doing that. I have to say, aside from this committee, the recycling centres have been absolutely fabulous since I've come back in-house, and brilliant. And I'm glad we're making sure, by auditing them, that they run even better. But thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Chair. I think maybe just a couple of observations more than a question, but just building on what colleagues have said about AI, I mean, the very nature of what we're talking about today, there's so much data that needs to be pulled together to ensure you get the right results, as it were. So I totally support the need to get up to speed on AI, and if I may say so, the sooner the better, but of course it doesn't happen overnight, does it? When we're talking about send, and we're all aware of the incredible costs that have been reported to us, just a comment that you've made. Audit time has been requested in Q3, 24-25 to provide assurance. Bit picky, but been requested. Are you going to be able to support that in Q3?
Yes, we always try and work with the service to schedule it in at the most convenient time for services. So yes, where we can, we try and fit in with their timetable. And it's always good that services do request our assistance, because it's always better to do an audit with somebody's cooperation rather than forcing your way in. So I think it's great that services request our help, because it shows that they want to improve themselves.
Yeah. And just on the final one, taxi operators, in the majority of cases, licenses are usually issued by the borough councils. And I think you said earlier that there's no working relationship issues at all. So in East Staffordshire, where I come from, have you got that relationship with the borough council?
I
A
think
strong, excuse me, a strong working relationship is what I mean, because this is so important, isn't it?
Well, all the boroughs are part of the Staffordshire County Fraud Partnership, so if there was a fraudulent aspect to any of that, it would get reported, and we sit as part of that forum. But we do work together generally. I think it's at various degrees. Clearly, as we provide the audit function for South Staffs and Newcastle, those relationships will be a lot stronger. But what we're looking at for taxi operators here at the county is around compliance with our DPS contract and how we engage taxi drivers and taxi operators. So it's based upon the contracts and the engagement that we have with our taxi drivers and the personal assistants.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
I was just saying to the chair, not much for you to do then, ladies. So I'll get on with it. No,
Yeah, thank you, David.
lovely to see.
Agenda item 8, that's back to Lisa on the forward plan for the Audit and Standards Committee.
Thank you, Chairman. Before you, you've got the updated forward plan for 24-25. It outlines the standard items that need to come through to yourselves as part of the audit year. You'll note that there are a number of the external audit items that have been highlighted in blue. I've parked them under March, the 25th of March 25 meeting. I'll bring them forward and put them into the relevant agenda for the meeting as and when they become available on there. And also the results of the internal audits and any standards matters that arise will also be fed into this particular programme of work. So happy to take any questions in respect of the document you have before you.
No, I think we're all very satisfied with what you've got there, Lisa. So,
Thank you.
That brings us to the end, I think, of the, before we go into private and confidential. So I'll do the job of reading the, that the public be excluded from the meeting for the following terms of business, which involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph report 1 of Schedule 12A as amended of the Local Government Act 1972 as indicated below.